Welcome. Today I'm going to talk about how we can dynamically optimize test generation using machine learning. This is the architecture that we were verifying last year at NVIDIA. With 54 billion transistors, it is one of the largest chips in production. In order to ensure that this hardware works as intended, we heavily utilize constrained random testing. In constrained random testing, test randomization constraints steer the random test stimulus that is generated from the test bench towards hitting various verification targets in the design under test. Typical targets are cover points for functional coverage, logic for new features, or corner cases for a bug in the design. However, this style of testing can be difficult and time-consuming. Firstly, there could be many constraints to set. Secondly, the mapping between these constraints to the final verification targets may not be trivial due to the complexity of the design and randomness of the test bench. This often makes the process of manually tuning constraints tedious and iterative. Wouldn't it be nice if these constraints could be automatically tuned to steer the test generation towards our verification targets? This is where machine learning comes in. We can utilize a machine learning technique called Bayesian optimization to optimize test generation constraints. The optimization process starts off with random constraints. As the test bench generates stimulus with these random constraints, monitors can gather feedback from the design under test on how well the verification targets are being exercised. Next, with this gathered data, a machine learning model is fit to map the effects of the constraints on the verification targets. Based on the learned mapping, BayesOpt can suggest the next set of constraints to run. We can let the machines go off and iterate on this process without any manual effort. Here is a toy example where the objective function shown by the orange line should be maximized. BayesOpt randomly samples the function at the red dot. Since that is all the information it gathers, it fits a flat model as shown by the blue line above. The acquisition function inside BayesOpt, as shown by the blue line below, indicates where to explore next. Note that it decides to sample the next point far away from where it sampled the first point. This is because BayesOpt explores regions where it does not have much data about. The process continues as it weighs where to explore versus where the model indicates that the objective must be high. By iteration 6, it has found a local maxima. But it continues to explore the undersampled region on the right, and soon it finds the global maxima. This property of BayesOpt, where it continues to explore, really helps it escape locally optimal constraints. Another cool property of BayesOpt is that its machine learning models uncertainty as well, making it robust against noisy data due to the randomness of the final test stimulus. BayesOpt can readily be adopted with a simple off-the-shelf Python library called scikit-optimize. It supports various machine learning models, such as the popular gradient-boosted regression trees model. It also supports various acquisition functions, such as expected improvement and probability of improvement to weigh exploration. You can refer to our paper for details and experiments with these models and acquisition functions. Scikit-optimize supports two types of constraints, categorical and numeric. A categorical constraint has multiple categories to choose from. For example, the various instruction types that can be generated. Numeric constraints refer to decimal or integer numbers such as probabilities, weights, or endpoints of ranges. We found that all the constraints across our test benches fell under these supported types. Thanks to the amazing scikit-optimize library, implementing the BayesOpt flow is surprisingly simple. The core of BayesOpt only takes 3 lines of code to implement. First, an optimizer object is created with the desired model and acquisition function. Then, the various constraints are specified as a list. In this example, we have a categorical constraint representing instruction types, memory, and ALU. and a numeric constraint representing some sort of cycle time between 0 to 5. Next, we can ask BayesOpt for 3 constraints, upon which it will generate 3 samples. We can then run 3 tests with these constraints, gather the feedback, and tell it back to BayesOpt. Every tell call refits the optimizer's machine learning model with all the data it has ever been told. The next ask call will suggest constraints to try based on the updated model. I will now present 3 test benches where we applied Bayesian optimization. In this first test bench, the target was to improve the traffic in a downstream interface in the design. The constraints controlled the properties of upstream instructions. There were 8 categorical constraints with 4,608 unique combinations. In this setup, every iteration involved running a test with the constraints from the optimizer, monitoring the interface activity during the test, and reporting it back to the optimizer after the test finished running. We observed that BayesOpt managed to massively boost the interface traffic 6.3 times from just 15% to 95%. In comparison, the interface activity from the original random constraints languished consistently below 15%. In the second test bench, the objective was to improve the cover counts of multiple timing-sensitive cover points in the design. In order to better cover such cover points, this test bench had the capability of injecting random stalls to internal interfaces. There were 27 numeric constraints overall that controlled properties of the stall injection, such as the injection probability and the number of stall cycle ranges. Due to the large number of cover points and their timing-sensitive nature, it would have been very difficult to tune these constraints manually. In this setup, there was one optimizer for every cover point. At every iteration, all the tests intended for the various cover points were run in parallel. Since every test can measure the coverage for all the cover points, every optimizer observed the results from all the tests. This greatly boosted the amount of data observed by each optimizer. We observed that BayesOpt managed to tune the constraints and boost the cover counts of these timing-sensitive cover points by 2 to 6 times. In the third test bench, there was a FIFO deep in the design with low utilization. The FIFO had complex push-pop logic that was not directly accessible by the test bench. The test bench added the capability to reactively stall various packets going into the overall design, but there was a huge number of possible stall trigger conditions. There were 5 categorical constraints with more than 32,000 unique combinations. Since this test bench is reactive, the optimization iterations happen while the test is running. The optimizer is called for constraints and is fed back results in the loop. The results from the constraints are gathered over observation windows of several cycles. In the previous test benches, the communication between the test bench and the optimizer was more straightforward and could be done over files. However, this test bench communicates with the optimizer over system calls. With BayesOpt in the loop, we observed a shift in the distribution where tests could fill more of the FIFO. Finally, filling up the FIFO completely was an important condition as well, that we had to test more frequently. With BayesOpt, 7 times more tests managed to completely fill the FIFO. In conclusion, we have seen that BayesOpt can automatically tune test randomization constraints without any human in the loop. It has allowed DV engineers to focus on other important work instead of iterating on constraints. We also observed that BayesOpt can optimize test generation significantly to achieve verification objectives under various scenarios, from coverage closure to feature bringup. Finally, due to the nice scikit optimized library, we hope that it will be easy for you to adopt BayesOpt. In the future, we would like to scale up BayesOpt to even larger number of constraints by utilizing more powerful models. than the ones available with scikit-optimize. Thank you.